Today, we are becoming obsessed with butterflies and transformation, which is kind of what this podcast is all about. We don't typically talk about it as this huge moment in time, but it's those decisions that you make over and over again, those moments where you ask yourself, what if? And you think about what life could be if you were really living it the way you wanted to, which can be a hard place to get to. And the journey is almost never linear and always a little messy. And today's guest knows a lot about that. Rachel Burr is an executive coach and leadership consultant with over 20 years of experience helping leaders and teams grow through the messy, complicated parts of leadership, because let's be honest, that's where the real magic happens. Her work blends organizational development, clinical psychology, and data to help people lead with more clarity, influence, and authenticity. And she recently released her book, Butterfly Goo. I am so excited to dig into this more, Rachel. Butterfly Goo, the down and dirty truth about transformation. Rachel is on a mission to make transformation feel more honest, more human, and way less filtered. Instead of the pretty curated version we see online, think about a butterfly and how its beauty distracts from its journey. She wants to talk about the goo, the real, raw, unglamorous middle of change. Think play, experimentation, and getting curious with your own process. Because, as she just said to me that I loved, transformation is like a playground. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the Becoming Obsessed podcast.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so excited to talk to you about all the goo today.
I really want to dig into butterfly goo and really just take me back to the messy middle of where this idea came from. I almost wanted to say the beginning, but I know there's almost no beginning for ideas like this.
There is almost no beginning. And it's funny because I find at different stages of the journey, including writing the book, that it's my journey and everything I've gone through has brought me to where I need to be, to where I am now, and to what I'm creating going forward. A lot of people have asked me, how long did it take you? You know, what was your impetus for writing this? And the length is one thing. The impetus, I tell people, I feel like this book has been trying to write itself through me for a very long time. And I finally gave up fighting it. So yeah, it's the book itself. It took me about a year and a half to publish. The journey up until that and wrestling with myself that this was the kind of book that I wanted to write, that was like a decade.
I just watched this show on Netflix, this movie called, I think, Planet Lonely or Lonely Planet. And it's a group of authors who go on an author's retreat. And one of the new, fresh, green authors says, I dedicated this to my partner because I couldn't have done it without him. And one of the 60, 70-year-old authors who's well in the game was like, that's BS. It would have came out of you either way. You can't hold it back.
Love that. And I think the other piece of that too is my brother told me this, and I'm sure your listeners out there, it's from a book or it's from literature somewhere, and they probably know this better than I do, but it really hit me years ago. In this story, one of the characters walks into this enormous library, books floor to ceiling, and you can't even see the ceiling. And he asks, what is this place? And the curator says, these are all the stories that were never written. And I didn't want my story to end up in that library.
Yeah. We tend to hold ourselves back a lot, right? A lot of people probably feel their stories sitting in that library. And it sounds like you struggled with that for, like you said, a decade. What was this moment where you finally gave yourself permission? What was that kind of journey, that thought process to say, you know what, this is the book and this is the book I want to write?
Well, and I like to talk about in the book this idea of clicks. So think about a combination lock, that the lock springs open, and that's often the moment we look at, the eureka moment, the butterfly coming out of the cocoon. But we don't appreciate all the little clicks along the way that got you to that place. So I think I decided I wanted to write a book a long time ago. I thought, I need to write a business book because this is what I do. It needs to be a coaching book, or it needs to be very serious. And if you know me, I am not a serious person. I am very good at serious topics, but humor to me is fundamental to what we do and how we manage through life. And you'll see that in the book. It's very humorous memoir. So if you don't like my sense of humor, you won't like the book. So just, caveat. So I sat down and I read a book. It's called Let's Pretend This Never Happened, a mostly true memoir. And I'm going to plug Jenny Lawson. She's the author. And she is so raw and vulnerable and funny and sarcastic. And it's a conversation. You can hear her voice coming through the book. And I had that moment, that first click, or one of the clicks. I think there are clicks you don't recognize a lot. I had a big click. I was like, I don't have to sound formal. I don't have to write it in this really kind of stuffy, stiff way. And to all of you who write books in a more formal way, this is not a dig on you. This is about me finding my voice, that I could use my humor. I could use my sarcasm for good, not evil. I could, use the way that I talk and think about the world and the analogies and metaphors. I'm like, I can write this way. But that wasn't the moment of just the awakening and the breaking open. I still let myself question the gremlins that we have, or the inner critics that we have in our heads. Like, oh, but you can't write a book. And even if you did, what could you say that nobody else has said? All of this. And one of the things on that I came to terms with, that question of that we ask ourselves as authors or potential authors, well, what can I say that nobody else has said before? Probably nothing. Like absolutely nothing. What you can do is you bring your voice to that message. You bring your perspective to that message. And as a result, there are going to be people out there that resonate with you and your message in a way that maybe they've never resonated with any of the other ways they've heard this told before. And if you can help impact their life, your voice is worth it. And it's worth it for you to be able to speak your truth and get it out into the world. So that was a piece of it. And then again, going through the clicks, it's really important to me that we don't focus on the eureka moment. The eureka moment is beautiful and it's so much fun. That is not the transformation. That is the result of the transformation. And it's important to recognize the difference because we go, like I said, through the goo to get to the butterfly. So my clicks, my goo as part of this was I read books. I listened to podcasts on writing. I talked with other writers. I started writing. I stopped writing. I hired a coach. I did all of these things. And then one moment in time that I don't even remember what was happening in that moment. I just remember I broke open. From all those little clicks, it broke open. And I sat down and started writing and it just poured out of me. And that was when I knew that this story had been in me for a very long time. And I had finally opened the floodgates.
I love the way you describe that because it's so easy. You mentioned before we hit record, like it's so easy on social media and the internet these days to just see the final. And
Yeah,
even when somebody's telling their story, I have this kind of joke with myself that people never talk about failure while they're in failure, right? Like
I am.
you don't hear the story until it's wrapped up with a bow. Even now, it's like we can look back and see those clicks, but allowing yourself to experience those clicks, even if it means, oh, I think I finally got it. And then you stop writing for a while because you're like, it just isn't. And
Yeah.
then you come back to it and allowing that space and time for all the little clicks to happen instead of just focusing on when am I going to have my big eureka transformation moment.
Yeah, it is. And it is, we say that a lot, that it's steps, journey of 1,000 miles. And a lot of times these things become trite, but I say that because they're true. So it is a truth that keeps weaving itself through stories, through our lives. And it is so easy for us to, like you said, look at curated perfection and feel so intimidated by it. And of course, it's like that doesn't exist. And so being able to get into the muck and goo and recognize what it truly is and recognize that you are going to have starts and stops, that there are going to be pieces to your journey. And just because this piece went well doesn't mean it's going to keep going well. In fact, I can guarantee you it's not. And that's okay.
So, Rachel, fill us in a little bit more on what butterfly goo is and the experience of reading the book and why somebody should go out and buy it. I know it came out in March.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations. That's so
Thank you.
exciting.
Very exciting. So originally I just had this idea that came out. It's funny because when people talk to you about writing a book, they say, oh, you sit down with an idea and you put together this outline and you fill in that. It's not how this happened. It was kind of like just dumping on the page, had no idea what I was doing. Story of my life. I seem to find myself on this path all the time.
That's the best
And
place to be. Somewhere
it
where you have
is.
no idea what you're doing.
Oh, and for me, because that's outside your comfort zone, we only grow outside our comfort zone. So when I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm very clearly outside my comfort zone. So yay me. So at some point, what showed up for me was the idea of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey.
Mm-hmm.
And for folks who aren't familiar with that, Joseph Campbell was a writer, philosopher, and he said that while, yes, all of our journeys are unique, they're for us, the idea that there are these stages that we go through. And I'm not going to go through all of those. You can read them in the book. But movies, Grimm's fairy tales, all of these, they tend to have this arc. You know, the hero starts on their journey, or rather, they're in their normal life. They hear the call, they resist the call. Eventually, they get their butts in gear and they break into the unknown. Then there are these trials and tribulations, and they find mentors and friends along the way. And they go into the deepest, darkest cave that they're afraid to enter, and they conquer their monster. And in the movies, it's interesting. It's seen as this external force when really the thing we're conquering is mostly inside ourselves. So for me, the butterfly has always resonated. And I have to put a caveat. I think this is so funny because my brother's an entomologist.
Okay.
So I use butterfly and cocoon because that's what we're used to. But technically, as he put it, butterflies come out of a chrysalis, moths come out of a cocoon. And I said, yeah, I'm going to stick with the butterfly, even though he believes that moths are much cooler.
I have to say, I think moths are underrated, so I can get on board with that.
Well, maybe the next book will be about moths and how they're underrated and they're kind of the second class citizen to the butterfly. So what I love about the butterfly, and as you said, we were talking about earlier, that we get so enamored by this because the butterfly is beautiful and there's this moment of emergence from the cocoon. And that is the eureka moment for the butterfly. However, what really happens to get the butterfly there is obviously we know it starts as a caterpillar. It weaves its chrysalis cocoon. And what happens is in that cocoon, it dissolves into this goo like substance, like really dissolves its current form. And what I love is that everything that caterpillar needs to become a butterfly, it brings with it into the cocoon. So when it dissolves, it is going back down to its fundamental building blocks. And when those building blocks are clear, when we understand our building blocks, the caterpillar already knows its building blocks. We have to discover ours. And then once we understand that, we can build something new. We don't have to be caught in the old paradigm, the old blueprint of our lives. We can construct something new. And that's when we emerge. And so the butterfly coming out of the cocoon is not transformation. It is the result of transformation. It is a beautiful result. And everything that caterpillar is now in that butterfly.
With what you were saying earlier of like the clicks that make it so that you actually get to the transformation, the big moment, but it really is the clicks that are these little stepping stones to the transformation.
Yep.
I love I always love a good, I would say this is a metaphor. My aunt was my English teacher, and if I get that wrong, she's going to come after me. But I love this metaphor because it gives us something really tangible to look back on our lives with a little bit more grace, with a little less pressure. And I also love how this kind of continues through not only I almost want to say there's multiple transformations throughout life, is really what it makes me think of. Is like each little click is its own little transformation, but as you described it, going from the caterpillar to the chrysalis to the butterfly, it's like that's not one motion. It's like
Mm-mm.
at least three stages and then all the stages in between. And then once you're a butterfly, you still have these huge journeys to go on.
I like to say that with each caterpillar, they only get one journey and one butterfly, but we have infinite journeys. The only end is if we say there is. And I like that inside every butterfly is another hungry caterpillar.
We've talked a little bit about your clicks and transformation to get to this book.
Mm.
I'm really curious about some of the early clicks and transformation that got you to the place in your career of working with so many leaders, that even happened way before you were like, oh, yes, let me put this into a book.
Oh, yes. Well, that is where the book begins, actually. I was midway through a PhD program in psychology, and I loved psychology. I loved the idea of understanding how we work, how our minds don't work sometimes. I loved studying, I loved learning, and I was miserable
Mm.
because I'd gotten on this path, a path that wasn't mine to walk, but it was a path that was there. So I stepped onto it. And I had never considered where this path was leading me. And I realized it wasn't someplace I wanted to go. But I didn't know any other way. I didn't know how to get off the path. And I was stuck in my comfortable discomfort. I knew I was miserable, but the idea of stepping into the unknown was big and scary. And at that time, very vulnerable to say, but most of my decisions were based on fear
Mm.
and avoiding failure specifically at all costs. And the problem was I was normally, you're in a graduate program, you're surrounded by other people who want to be professors or researchers or therapists, whatever they want to do. So the analogy I use, because I love analogies too, is I was on this circus train, this fabulous train filled with toys and fun, and I hadn't considered where it was going. And on that train were two types or groups of people. One was the group, the academics, who were so excited. I have a friend who's a professor at LSU. She is one of those people. She loves it. She's great at it. She could not wait to get to where she was going. And then there's the other group who were stuck, like I was, but they didn't know what else to do either. Neither of those groups of people could help me. Best intentions, people who love that path don't know how to help you get off of it. People who are stuck don't know how to get themselves off of it,
Yeah.
let alone you. So what I said was, there are moments sometimes, tongue in cheek, but that the fear of change happens when the fear of the unknown is finally dwarfed by a looming dread of the same.
Yeah.
And I had this break open moment, and you'll see it more in the book. I was actually scuba diving in Bonaire, and I had really resisted going on this trip because, as my gremlins informed me, you don't know how to scuba dive. Clearly, you don't know how to learn. Not only could you fail and drown, but worse, you could look stupid. So some clicks happened there that finally something was pushing me forward. I talk about the universe, however people want to conceive of that. I also talk about my own subconscious, where there's the true me that was buried deep within there that was trying to get out, was trying to tell me something. So we're on this boat in the middle of the ocean, miles from shore. I'm certainly not going to be able to get off the boat. I contemplate, well, could I stay on the boat and just wait for everybody else to finish? And I wasn't going to do that. One, it would be humiliating. But again, something was pushing me. And I finally stepped off the boat. And once I got under the water, it was just beautiful. There were fish everywhere, even a barracuda, which is, scary. And all of a sudden, I laughed. And I had to grab my regulator to keep from drowning, because who laughs in the ocean? And I was filled with this joy. I was filled with this excitement and this appreciation for beauty, which I had not felt in a very long time. And I had convinced myself at that point that we just get to a point in life where we're not excited anymore, that we don't feel joy, we don't do all these things. And I realized I could feel all of that. I just didn't feel it about what I was doing with my life. And that was kind of the point where, I walked, swam across the threshold. For the start of the journey, at that point, there was no turning back.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people will see themselves in that and see their moments of, is this what life is? Maybe life isn't as joyful, or like, that's who I really love to speak to with this podcast as well, is like that reminder that you have control to make it a little bit better. Even if you think that's all that's left, yeah, step off the boat. And like, if
Mm-hmm.
you're already kind of scared and unhappy, then you might just be more scared and unhappy in the water. Or
Mm-hmm.
you might laugh, and that might be scary too, because like you said, who laughs in the ocean?
In the ocean. And when you say that too, I was talking to someone the other day that finally had gotten up the courage. They'd been miserable for so long, and they'd gotten up the courage to quit their job. And they're like, but I'm afraid, they made good money, the golden handcuffs, all of that. And they're like, but Rachel, I don't think I'll ever find a job as good as this again. I said, you mean a job that where you're miserable and it's soul crushing? No, I think there are plenty of jobs out there like that.
You could probably, make even more money by being
You
even more
could.
miserable if that's your measure.
Absolutely. You could do that. So I think that it's important to watch what our gremlins are telling us. And, ultimately our gremlins are just us. They may be an older version of us that, long ago that was keeping us safe from something that maybe no longer exists and that doesn't trust that we are enough to actually overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
But those conversations with ourselves are really good at lulling us into complacency, that it's okay, that, this is good enough. Anytime you hear yourself say this, well, this is good enough, that's a red flag. And we love listening to like the gremlins, and we hate paying attention to the red flags. And that's the trap. And the trap is that the world is not keeping us stuck. We are keeping us stuck. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
there are people that have far worse circumstances than anything I have ever experienced. I also know people who have had far worse experience than anything I have experienced. And they have made leaps and steps that are, for me, absolutely inspirational. And I watch these people. So as we're on this, I am not speaking from myself in terms of being able to relate to that level of struggle, that level of the journey and what is set up against you. I refer to these people that I know, that I have seen, that have been able to do that. And we all have our place. We all start our journeys from different points. And it's not better or worse, but we have to start from where we are or we'll never begin.
I love the saying, our each individual's person hardest thing is your hardest thing. And if you can't really compare what somebody else goes through to what you've gone through, because as you mentioned, there are people right now going through things that I will never be able to imagine, praise God, hopefully we'll never have to experience. And it again, one, helps us have perspective, and two, we also have to remind ourselves, like, our hardest thing is our hardest thing, and it doesn't discount our struggles and our moments of, I don't like my life. I think it's really easy for a lot of us to feel that pressure from both sides of
Yeah.
seeing people online having this quote unquote perfect life or something desirable, and then us wanting to have something different, but at the same time feeling, oh, but I should just be grateful. Like, I
I
should just
should just be
say,
grateful.
I should just be grateful. I have food and shelter and great people around me. Like, why do I get to make a change?
Yeah. I don't know about you. Remind me, but you are from and live in the Midwest, correct?
I am. I'm from Nebraska. Yeah.
And I grew up in Iowa.
Okay.
So
I meant to ask you before we hit record.
yes, absolutely. And I went to college in Minnesota, grad school in Missouri, lived in Wisconsin, Michigan. So I have pretty much covered the Midwest, and that Midwest humility
Mm-hmm.
and need for appreciating what you have is deeply ingrained in me. And I think while I value that characteristic, that what I've been taught, because I do believe we need to be grateful. Any strength taken too far becomes a weakness.
Yeah.
So anything about, well, I should just be happy with what I have, lulls us into complacency. That I'm not enough, instead of being, having this hubris and being, how fabulous I am, then it becomes, I'm not fabulous. I can't do those things. So, while all those values are important in balance, yes, we have these moments where we either allow ourselves to stay where we are because we think we shouldn't want for more, and then we don't believe that we're capable of
Mm-hmm.
achieving more. And those are some of the key pieces that keep us stuck.
This is something I'm really passionate about. So I live in Omaha and we actually have a huge entrepreneurship, tech, startup community. And it's this big joke that people in Omaha often are like, there's nothing to do here. Nobody's here. There's no companies. And it's just a matter of you need to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other problem there is we need to be louder. We can still be grateful and be less humble. And especially as women in tech, women
Mm-hmm.
who, do want more,
Mm-hmm.
speaking up and saying, like, yes, I want more, talking about money. This is all things that I'm like very passionate and like try to be a force to push. Like,
Yeah.
be louder about you, your accomplishments, and not even just your accomplishments, but your desires, what you want, how much you want to make. And you can be grateful, but you don't necessarily need to be humble. And like you said earlier, that taken too far can be a problem. But I think we're on the low side of the
Oh
spectrum
yeah.
for humility, where it's like, no, let's speak up a little bit more, be a little louder,
Yes.
and show up for ourselves and to help other women claim more as well.
I think that's a really important piece. If we're uncomfortable with being able to speak up for ourselves or to be, because there is a difference between being arrogant and speaking up and telling our truth and being proud of ourselves.
Yeah.
Not pride in a bad way, but we get to be excited about our wins. We get to be enthusiastic about our goals. And for some folks out there that might be initially a hard step, then reframe it. You are taking that step and communicating your truth to inspire other people, to help them see, if, as a woman, help other women, young girls see what's possible. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's like on social media, the loudest voices are these perfect like worlds. It's like, how discouraging is that? So if you're out there and you have your success and you can share with vulnerability what you are up against, all of those things, then you are modeling and encouraging a whole new generation of young girls and of women that are already, in their life full on board. Maybe they're like halfway through their career and yet they feel stuck too. And they need to know they're not alone. We all need to know we're not alone.
Yeah. We keep using the word discomfort, and I want to dig
Mm-hmm.
into this a little bit more because as you were telling your story leading up to, being in a PhD program and then that scuba trip, I was thinking about how I'm almost same but opposite. Where growing up, I was so dead set on being different and making my life as big as I could that I always said, like, I love discomfort. I'm so good with change. I'm so good with uncertainty. And I convinced myself of those things, whether it was true or not, so that I could go out and make crazy decisions, like living in the Panamanian jungle or running a marathon in Greece and like all of these things that it really propelled me where I was like, I thrive being uncomfortable. Like that's where I want to spend my time. And kind of like you said, a strength can be taken too far. And I think that I pushed that for a long time. It served me well. And then I found myself and now find myself in that place again of being like, I actually want more comfort in my life. I want a little bit less of that hardcore all the time discomfort. This has been a few years of this now, and I think I've gotten too comfortable in a lot of ways. In work, not necessarily. Work is very uncomfortable and a lot of growth there. But for example, I have a 10-mile race on Saturday, tomorrow, in 2 days that I don't think I'm going to do because I haven't been training. And it's this whole kind of I've gone the opposite on the same kind of roller coaster and started at a different place of be so uncomfortable so that I'm growing all the time and pushing myself and then kind of being like, okay, maybe it's okay to be comfortable in some areas. And now again finding my way to a more intentional like selection of what where I want transformation in my life in this season and where I want to be uncomfortable and where I need to have a little bit more comfort so that I can be uncomfortable and growing in other areas. And I say that because I think it's so easy for us to go through one transformation and think we're at a landing place and think that landing
Mm-hmm.
place and that growth is the final destination. And we're sometimes surprised, or I know I tend to feel a little shock sometimes when I'm like, wait, I thought I already did that part. I thought I already grew through that part. And like, what's this next iteration coming for me now?
I love that. A couple of things stand out, and I have a question. I'm curious because I had times in my life where people thought I was already the person I am, that
Mm-hmm.
I needed to find kind of the brave or doing things that my dad would even say to me, "Where did you come from?" It's like, because you are not like your mother and I. I don't know where this happened. But even driving ourselves to discomfort for the sake of driving ourselves to discomfort, I'm wondering what you weren't comfortable enough with, maybe in the comfort, or what, you were trying to get away from in that comfort that had you push in ways that maybe or maybe weren't in service to you. They were just in service to being different.
Yeah. That is such a great question. And part of it was different for different sake, right? Especially
Mm-hmm.
growing up and in high school and college, I saw so many things in the world that I did not want. And one of those things that really I it's been really cool to like discover in the last 4 or 5 years. One of my driving motivations was to never let sexism affect me, to never be all these stories about sexism and mansplaining and all these things, and me being like, I'm going to be so tough and so capable. It's not that I have to be better than a man, but if a man ever thinks he's better than me, damn, I'll show you different, right? And that drove for a long time, not letting sexism affect me. I was like, huh, it affected me. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Funny. Like I'm just like everyone else. But that really drove this need or craving to go outside the box, to prove myself, prove that I could take care of myself. And I think the other thing, we kind of talk about like tropes or cliches and people saying, I looked back on my life and I regretted the things I didn't do more than the things I did. I just wanted to take extreme ownership over my life and my happiness. And there was definitely things with my family that were uncomfortable that would, it was so uncomfortable that nothing else really could be because I have a brother who's mentally ill. And so, like, nothing was ever going to be worse than that, anyways. So it wasn't, I also had this thing that, like, nothing else can scare me in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these just, like, we're talking about these pieces of your identity that you hold on to or that you kind of craft for yourself to build your identity, or because you're afraid of something else, or because of the way you're crafting the way you want to be perceived. I'm an Enneagram 8, so I just never wanted anybody to perceive me as weak, end all be
Mm-hmm.
all. And
Mm-hmm.
that's been something that really the last 4 years of my life I've really deconstructed, to the point where one of my friends a couple weeks ago was like, I don't want to say you've changed, but I'm used to you always being this like tough person who could handle anything. And I just like want to check in. You seem really emotional a lot more often. And I'm like, yes, amazing. I'm trying to allow that to just come out, and I can still step up when I need to, but not operating from that level for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And, it brings up a piece that I talk about in the book of this idea that the armor we wear, is
Mm,
customized to fit. It is not an off the rack acquisition. And we build it based on what we're fighting and where we see our weaknesses. And so we craft this armor. And that isn't all bad. One of the things, to your point, it's like if you need to go into battle, if you need to fight for something, armor is absolutely necessary. I'm not rolling into battle without tanks and and some good Kevlar or whatever it is. However, if what we want is connection and closeness to people, then we need how to figure out how to take off that armor. That armor has to have, like, air quotes, a zipper. It
yeah.
has to have a way that you can take it on and off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things we struggle with. Either the world is so raw, we feel so raw with the world that we put on the armor and we never want to take it off, or we're reacting to something in a way that we're going out into battle and racing in and we put our armor on. And the tricky part is being able to figure out how to get it on when we need it on and how to take it off when it's too heavy and it's keeping us from connecting to people.
I'm curious, in the book, did you relate armor to the cocoon or chrysalis? Because it kind of sounds like this thing we build around us to protect us. And then again, you have to take it off to flap your wings.
Yes. So I would say more of, I think that's an excellent analogy. I didn't use it. Maybe I'll use it in my next
Yeah,
book.
free to. It's yours.
So for me, part of Campbell's, then the journey is the trials and tribulations and the things we're going through. Sometimes we don't even realize it. And
Mm-hmm.
to your point, we have things in our past. I talk about like this kind of switch back to when I was a kid, or to your point, with your brother, my mom was mentally ill. And so we put on this armor as we go, and sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. And so, yes, is it an emergence as part of it? It is definitely part of the journey. I honestly don't know anybody out there that doesn't have a suit of armor, even if not currently on, at the ready, hanging in their closet,
Yeah.
whenever battle shows up. So I think that's part of and again, there are things happening outside of us that we do protect us. We want to protect ourselves from. The problem is that we are doing that to ourselves, not letting go when it's time to let go.
Mm-hmm.
We carry that fear and we feel the need to protect ourselves from the entire world. And the problem is, it's pretty lonely in that armor.
Yeah. It's it's like a wall. It's meant to keep things out. And for a life that you're obsessed with, you got to let some things in, even when they're scary, uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
especially people, right? I think that's the big one.
Yeah, they're the scariest of all.
Yeah. I want to take us in another direction before we cap this up because you mentioned a word that is like one of my favorite words. My word of 2025 is play.
Mm.
And you mentioned that transformation is like a playground, or you can treat it that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to hear more about this.
I think it's so important not to take life too seriously. As I said, it's not that there aren't serious things we have to go through, and I am not making light of any of that. But we are so intense, and we don't want to give an inch in terms of how, if we let go, if we laugh for a minute, or if we enjoy ourselves, that somehow we'll lose control. I think play is extremely important. And one of the things in the book is at the back, I have what's called a playground. There are exercises you can do. And like I said, I'm not here to tell you that you have to transform. I'm not even telling you you have to use the exercises. If all you want to do is read the book and laugh at my, mistakes and misfortunes, then do that. Nobody can tell you that. What I think is important to realize is that play and not taking things too seriously does not mean you're not growing. It means you're giving yourself permission to experiment, to fall, to fail, to do all those things, to not feel like I have to get it perfect every time. And what if life were a game? And people will say, well, it's not. Okay, well, what if it were? How
Mm-hmm.
would you play it? How would you show up? How would you play with that? And one of the analogies I love, I don't use it in the book, but when I was a kid, they had jungle gyms. Do they still have jungle gyms?
They're really safe now. Like if
They
you
are.
fall, you kind of bounce right back up.
Yeah, ours were built over concrete.
Yeah, no asphalt.
No asphalt. Yeah. So one of the things that always struck me, and I loved the jungle gyms, is essentially these things are made out of bars and solder and cement. Cement, at least they're holding it in the ground, maybe not as the pavement underneath, but we all had our challenges. If you take those same materials, bars, cement, concrete, you can also make a jail. It's about how you create the space, how you engage with that space, that either makes it a prison or it makes it something absolutely liberating. It's up to you.
Rachel, I have to say, I am using that. I am stealing that one. That one is so good. As soon as you started in on that, I was like, this is gold. I love the idea of a playground, and it is no secret. I tell the story all the time that in 2024, I started to get really burnt out. And it was maybe because my workload was a little higher than I wanted it to be, or there's all these, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. And now I'm trying to operate at a really high level, running three companies, like pushing for $1 million companies. And I'm really cautious again of like, I need to do more and I need to continue working at a high level without just do more, be more mentality. And what's
Yeah.
really helped me with that is treating each company like a playground. Instead of this mindset of like, oh my God, I have to get this right, I have to get this right, there's no really such thing as getting it right. And if I just want to like follow one path and get it right, I might get so far, but I want so much more than that that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't exist yet, that my brain couldn't figure out yet. And the science says that us and most all other mammals learn by play.
Mm-hmm.
That's how cats and lions, like, they play fight with each other, and that's how they learn social cues and how to engage and how to provide for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's how human kids learn too, is through play and imagination. And so I'm really leaning into this concept of treat each business like a playground. If I start to get a little too stressed or feel the pressure a little too much, how can I take a step back and just dream? And like you said about life, okay, treat it like a game. If I was playing Monopoly and I was dead set on winning, I got to find some stuff in here. I got to read the room and see what everyone else is doing and know who I'm playing against and get a little bit more fun and, in that sense, competitive instead of getting so fearful that, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose, I'm going to fail. Yeah, you're going to. And there'll be another game and we'll keep going. But that has really helped me in the last year to be able to not fall into that whole burnout cycle and work too much. It allows me to take that step back and say, you know what? I'm never going to get, this is never going to go further if I hold on with an iron grip, instead of taking a step back, going and playing, breathing, and seeing how I can look at it differently.
I love that. And to your point, it's so resonating, the play. I just started reading the book Play, and I can't think of who the author is right off the top of my head. We can put that in the show notes. And they're saying the same thing, that it's not even just mammals, but to your point, they find birds play, they find even kind of lower level animals. It's how they define what play is. And I do think it's important to open that up. And to your point, I've heard you say in other podcasts that they're kind of measuring it by like, is this a purposeless kind of
Mm-hmm.
activity? And what I love about that is, and they talk about in the book that somebody has to define the purpose. That okay, there's evolutionary kind of aspects to this. That's great. We learn how to do this, but fundamentally, we find these things that just bring us joy, and it's not specific that they're getting us to a particular place. They're not achieving a specific goal. And I think that's also why, we get so locked into that linear part of our brain. That's why when we go take a shower, we have these ideas because we've actually backed off from it. It's when we go take a bike ride or we go to a trampoline park, which I did.
I
That's a
love
whole
that.
nother story. Yeah, that's another story for another day. But trying to do things that you let go, that jungle gym, that you're opening up that space, that you're not keeping yourself within those rigid bars, which are very narrow, by the way, because they're meant to keep you inside. They're meant to keep
Mm-hmm.
you locked up. You've built it, but it's meant to keep you locked up and on the straight and narrow. And you go to the jungle gym, you go to play, and the space opens what's possible. And then you go back and maybe you bring some of that. Maybe you have inspiration, maybe you don't, but at least you let go for a while and it re-energizes you to come back into other parts of your life.
And it's what you mentioned in the beginning of this episode, allowing those little clicks and allowing the time that it takes instead of trying to force this transformation. When you're talking about these narrow bars that would be like a jail cell, that's actually exactly how my brain feels. I say my brain feels claustrophobic, where
Mm-hmm.
it's just like the skull around my brain is like so much smaller. And this
Mm-hmm.
is how I think about it, is when I'm feeling that way, where it's so small, I almost have no space to even think of anything else. I know I'm like, I have to get out in big spaces. I have to
Yeah.
get outside where there's no ceiling. I need to go on a walk. I need to just do anything that basically makes my skull feel bigger and like there's more space for me to just exist and
Yeah.
not necessarily think. And I can't quote the case study or the science behind this, but a handful of years ago, I read, I don't know, it might have even just been a Facebook post telling me that there was a case study about something, but that there is something to be said about if you want to do really black and white technical math problems, be in a really small space with a really low ceiling because your brain is
Mm-hmm.
going to stay in that space. And if
Mm-hmm.
you want to go be visionary and have imagination, get outside or get where there's really high ceilings because your brain also will take up that space. And whether it's true or not, that way of thinking has really served me.
Absolutely. And I think even to build on that, what I find is when we put ourselves in different spaces, that could be traveling across the world, it could be going down to the coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
We, as human beings, we habituate, which basically means we get used to whatever is happening around us. And it serves us. For example, think about the clothes and how they feel in your back. Think about your feet on the floor or your butt on a chair. Your brain needs to get used to that, so it's not focusing on that all the time, and so it can focus on other things. So it's very helpful for that. The problem is it also happens on a larger scale where we get used to the same environment, we get into these routines, we don't challenge them, and they become easy, which is a trap. Now, good easy when they need to be easy, but again, taken too far. And so when we take ourselves out of those situations, by definition, we have to be more present. We have to see what's going on. I used to love traveling to India for work, and the color of like the clothing and everything. And I always joke with my colleagues there that in India, driving is a contact sport. So I did not drive.
You're
It's
like
not a
bumper
good
cars.
idea. No, it is. But even watching traffic and crossing the street and doing all that, I always felt more present when I was there because I had to be more vigilant, but it felt so good to be grounded as opposed to, I'm a Netflix person too. It's like I use some escapism, YouTube, whatever, and that can't be too much. Again,
Mm-hmm.
taken too far. So getting out again of the comfort zone, if it's our office, our house, what we're doing, it forces us to think differently. It forces us to be present in a different way. We're surrounded by new information that may spark new things. Get outside or go someplace like a trampoline park or other places, that works for you. I do love travel, and it doesn't take away from the fact that sometimes going to, like I said, a new restaurant or going to a coffee shop, that's new too. And so all of those things help us break open our mind. They help us get more creative. It's not a waste of time. It's about living a fuller life and also living a fuller self in terms of even what your capacity is for greatness.
I'm bringing together like five things you said today, but it's about doing those things that are going to make you feel grounded and feel alive. And sometimes that's why we do something uncomfortable or unusual or go to a new country or a new coffee shop is so that you can again be grounded. There's evidence that new experiences actually slow your brain down. It has to do with like the amount you blink and things. I'm really not a scientist. My sister got all the science and data memory genes, and I just repeat things that I hear that I'm like, okay, that works for me. Yeah, I like it. But I love that because it is when you're feeling, like you felt in that PhD program of like, okay, I don't really know where I'm going here. Go somewhere where you don't know where you're going and just feel alive a little bit and let your brain just take in what's around it and feel grounded. And then maybe it'll start subconsciously to unravel the rest of things in life. But
I was going to say too, when you do that, because I think going back to the fear, some people may be sitting out there, it's like, oh no, that's scary, this and this. And yeah, it is scary. And if you're doing something that feels scary, if you take the mindset, just play a game with yourself and think about what would it be? What would this experience look like if I thought this was fun? If I
mm,
experienced this as fun, what would this look like? What would I feel like? And imagining yourself that, they talk about envisioning your life, all of that. And this is in the moment. Imagine yourself feeling something different and see what shows up.
yeah, I love that. I have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
I want to know what you're currently obsessed with. And since we're talking about play and new things, I want to know what you're obsessed with when it comes to play. How are you incorporating that side into your life, into your work these days?
I think what I'm obsessed with most of the time is this is going to sound funny, but it is about doing things that I know I'm never going to get good at. I have no intention of getting good at. So I will try something like doing some kind of art, which, and again, it's not that if I were to put in the hours, Could I get better? Of course I could. Am I ever going to be a concert pianist, or am I ever going to be, Picasso? No, I'm not. And I don't want to be. But watching yourself in those moments, I've picked up instruments that I've, trying to play for a little while. And there's this weird experience of when you get to that point where all of a sudden your hands take off without you. That's fascinating. And then, of course, when you realize that consciously, then you screw up. But being in those places where just trying things and that are fun, and knowing that I have no expectation that I'm ever going to be good at this or that there's ever a purpose, I just love that. And I love doing things that are, that other people think are ridiculous, but that I personally feel really. So one of the things that I did was I purchased a rhino in a bathtub. Now,
I'm like, at the thrift store? Like, where
yes,
did you find a rhino in a
no,
bathtub?
and I'm going to forget these artists' names. I should send them to you so we could also put them in the show notes. They create these beautiful, fun, whimsical. They have these great expressions. They're animals that are, kind of on the safari, rhinos, hippos, giraffes, all that kind of thing. But they put them doing very pedestrian, mundane things like driving a car or taking a bath or doing all these things. And years ago, I was at a trade show in Las Vegas with a friend of mine, and we were at the Wynn. And we were walking by all these stores, and they had these little pillars kind of out in the middle. And on top of each pillar, there was a little glass case. And in them would be some jewelry or something the different stores were selling. So they're like, oh, look at this, buy me. And it's about this big. I mean, that maybe doesn't look on the video. For those of you who can't see it, it's about 2 feet long, 2 feet long, 2 feet tall. It is not a small rhinoceros. And I saw him. And at the time, I just couldn't justify spending the money for art. And I told my friend, someday I'm going to write a book. And when I do, I'm going to buy that rhinoceros. I did. And I texted her and I said, over the years, I checked in on him, making sure that they were, he might still be available. And that to me is, I think it's whimsy. It's whimsy that I'm obsessed with. I love doing little things. I was trying to look around here. I've got stuff all over that just makes me smile. Here's vulnerability. I keep him around. He's a pen. I love it. And it makes me smile. And, it's funny because we have like different things. People would call it an eclectic style in our house. And a friend of mine's like, oh, wow. Do you Pinterest? How do you find this? And I said, no, we find stuff we like and then we find a place to put it. So that's what works. Yeah. So, and I don't remember your second question.
Yeah. No, that covers the first one. One of our guests on the podcast, Fia, I've always loved her home, and she recently moved and is doing something really cool, building an artist commune. So it's only getting cooler and cooler. But hers was the first house I was ever in where I was like, this is a literal museum. I could spend hours in here and always find something new every time I come, a new book, a new piece of art. And I love that. It especially, I went there in the time of social media and like art minimalism when that was all going on and everything was grayish and there's no color on any children anywhere. And so I think it just puts so much personality, and it reminds you, like, you can be sitting at work and then look up and be like, oh my gosh, I love this pen. Like, let me just, fidget spinner it for a little while, get out of my head a little bit, have a little bit more joy in life. It's like you said, when I describe what play is, I'm trying to find words to really describe it. And joyful and unproductive is one way. Since then, I've heard somebody say unnecessary. It's just unnecessary. Let me go color because I can, not because I need to, but because I'm like, okay, I'd rather do that than something else right now. And that's what I love about the pin with the like furry blue butt and head that you just showed. It's so unnecessary. And that's what makes it amazing.
Yes. The only criterion for me in so much of what I do is, does it make me laugh? Does it bring me joy? Is it whimsical? And everything around me has a story. There is nothing in this house that I purchase that doesn't, or even that just exists. I mean, other than things like my washer and dryer, which
Yeah.
to be quite honest, do not bring me joy. Although, that compared to beating it on a rock probably does bring me joy.
That one time or one or two times might bring you a lot more joy
Yeah,
than
it's
doing
true.
it
That
in the.
might, yeah, maybe not the same sense of whimsy that it is. And you surround yourself by this. And I love to laugh. And for me, it is such every day. There's a book. It's called, I'm going to forget it, and I'm sure I have it here, but it's essentially written by these folks that work at Stanford. One's a full-time professor, and the other one came from improv and now teaches. And they teach this idea of, kind of happiness and how it applies in business and in life. And they teach it in the MBA program. And one of the things they do is the first day that they do it, they have these people fill out a sheet and they ask them questions about happiness, about joy, about laughter. And then they say, well, when was the last time that you laughed out loud? And people struggle with this question. And my thought is, I don't know. What time is it?
Yeah, like 5 minutes ago?
5 minutes ago, maybe, half an hour, sometime today. I wasn't keeping track.
I have another obsession question for you.
Okay.
And this, I feel like, is a similar question, and we might go in a similar direction that we just went. But what is filling your cup? And what are you learning from? Like, who do you look to? What books, podcast, entertainment is filling your cup lately?
So I think it's a balance. I think, obviously I have kind of the work stuff that is going on in podcasts and what's going on in coaching or what's going on in general. And then I go back to humor. And there is a podcast. This is so silly. It's called Films to be Buried With. You know
Okay.
it?
No, I've never heard of
No.
this.
Films to be Buried With. So it is by Brett Goldstein, who played in Ted Lasso.
Oh my
And
gosh. Love. Absolutely
love
obsessed with him.
Love it. He hosts this. And it's like he could do any podcast about films, but there's a lot of them. So to distinguish himself, he has this kind of framework. And it's basically his guests come on his show. He tells them they've died. They're going to heaven. It's filled with the happiest stuff, whatever they like, their favorite things. They talk about their favorite things. And then he has a series of questions that the person gets to tell their life through film. And what happens as a result is they start talking about just their life around these pillars. So he starts off with, what's the first film you ever saw? And then goes to, what's the funniest? What made you cry? What's your favorite? What's the one that you love that nobody else does, but you're committed? And I have a list and I keep reworking my list. Someday when he invites me on that show, I am going to be ready. And it's just, it drops every Wednesday, and every Wednesday I listen to the next episode, and it just brings me joy. To your point, I love him, and he's a great host. A lot of those comedians I find, and not disparaging them, there are a lot of comedians I really like, but they're not good interviewers because they're used to just laughing and doing that. And he does this lovely balance of both. And so and then at the end, the last question he asks is, okay, there's only room in the casket for one video. What do you take across? And it's just fascinating to watch people's lives unfold through something so simple as, what movies do you like?
That is getting added to my list right now. I only have a couple non-businessy podcasts that I've been listening to, and lately I feel like I've heard all their episodes. And I'm like you said, I'm waiting for them to drop each week. And I need some more silly, fun, just joyful content to throw on in the background. And so I'm going to give that one a go.
Good. Excellent.
I could sit here and talk to you. There's so many more things I want to talk about, but I'm going to bring this all home. So, Rachel, how can people buy your book, connect with you, work with you?
First, they can go to my website for the book. It's butterflygoobook.net. And there are links where you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Barnes & Noble. The great thing is you can probably buy it anywhere. Just search for Butterfly Goo Book when you go onto Amazon, because otherwise you get a bunch of stuff that really is about butterflies and goo and other things like that. So if you look at butterflygoobook.net, so you can find it. So yeah, it's out there. It's in the world.
Amazing. I cannot wait to read it. I am like, add to cart right now. This has been such a joy, and the last time I laughed was about 30 seconds ago, so I think we're doing good on our laugh quota for the day. Thank you so, so much for coming on the Becoming Obsessed podcast. And if you're still listening, then please let us know. Reach out to Rachel or me. You can find me at Becoming Obsessed Pod on Instagram. I've been saying this lately, but seriously, send me a voice note because I want to hear what you found that you laughed at in this episode or what you're currently obsessed with and what's filling your cup.